The other two soldiers refused to give up. It wasn't until 1972 that the Filipino police shot two of the Japanese soldiers.
It's all or nothing on this one. The work wasn't cheap. Get the car to the buyer clean. This should be a payday, people.
In 1974, a Japanese tourist came into contact with Onoda and talked some sense into him. However, it wasn't until one of Onoda's former commanding officers pleaded with a group of other military personnel that Onoda officially surrendered and returned home from the Philippines as a very confused retired soldier. He'd been fighting World War II for almost 30 years after it officially ended. And this wasn't just an isolated incident. Other Japanese soldiers who were spread out across the Pacific never received word that the war had ended. They continued to fight, not believing for a second that Japan would ever surrender, let alone lose the war. The last orders these soldiers were given was to fight until the bitter end, no matter what. They were so devoted to the emperor that they would gladly lay down their lives for their country, surrendering never even crossed their minds. This just goes to show that the end of World War II did not happen at the same time for everyone. Tragically, some of the last people who given their lives back after World War II were captured by the United States. Although the war officially ended on September 2nd, 1945, Japanese internment camps in the United States did not close until March 1946. This was almost half a year after the Allies celebrated victory over Japan, and the rest of the world received word that World War II was over. Yet, 120,000 people who were Japanese heritage were still kept in internment camps long after the first war was over. For these people, World War II did not end in 1945. In fact, the last internment camp ended on March 20, 1946. Many after these innocent people were released from what can only be described as prison, they were often mistreated by other Americans who were work or where their families from. It would be more apt to say that World War II for Japanese Americans did not end for several years or even decades after 1945, as they were still persecuted in many areas. This is the sad truth about what war does to people. During World War II, there was no population of people treated more horribly than the Jews. For many, the atrocities of the war would never be forgotten. World War II would be part of them for their entire lives as they suffered from PTSD and other afflictions caused by the Nazis and their allies. It's important to remember that even until this day, the horrors of World War II are ingrained in the psyches of many in the Jewish community. Even when the fighting stopped, there was still a long road to recovery for many people. United States soldiers who fought for years in the war did not actually get to experience the end of World War II for many months after the surrender of Japan. The soldiers wanted to return home now that the fighting was over. This wasn't an unreasonable request. However, many were required to stay abroad and oversee the transitions to new governments and to ensure that the peace treaties were enforced. The soldiers in the Pacific got so angry with being ignored by their representatives that they came up with the slogan, "No votes, no votes." This would be written or stamped on letters sent back to the United States as a way to remind those in the government that if they weren't allowed to return home soon, they would be held to pay in the next election cycle. Things got so bad that U.S. soldiers started to hold protests against their own government. On Christmas Day in Manila, around 4,000 American soldiers held a mass demonstration to bring attention to their cause. They wanted to go home, and if the government wasn't going to bring them back, they were going to cause trouble. And this wasn't the only example of protests occurring. Demonstrations in London, Paris, and Frankfurt all carried the same battle cry. Some saw this as a form of mutiny. The stranded soldiers had done their duty during World War II and risked their lives. It didn't seem like too much to ask to be brought home. The soldiers eventually did get back to the U.S., but many did not consider the war over until their boots were back on American soil. Officially, there are 3 different days that World War II ended. For many Europeans,